to date with events and issues in Nicaragua, you can sign up for Nica Notes, which includes a weekly article by an invited author, followed by news updates of the week. Sign up at the Alliance for Global Justice website, afgj.org. 2 ebooks are also available free in English and Spanish, downloadable in several formats. These were collectively written by a network of activists, including all 4 of us before you this afternoon. The first of these ebooks is called Live from Nicaragua, Uprising or Coup. This ebook describes and analyzes the violent attempted overthrow of the Sandinista government in 2018 and the events surrounding it. The second ebook is entitled The Revolution Won't Be Stopped, Nicaragua Advances Despite U.S. Unconventional Warfare. This ebook describes the events which took place in 2019 as well as the early months of 2020 when the Nicaraguan government began to address the COVID-19 pandemic. Just go to the same Alliance for Global Justice website, afgj.org, to download the ebooks. This webinar is intended to be part of a series, usually occurring about once a month. Please mark your calendars for the next webinar in the series 2 weeks from today. This will take place on Sunday, March 14th at the same hour as today, except that please note that that is the first day of daylight saving time in the US and Canada. The topic of that webinar is US Exceptionalism and Nicaragua. The speakers will be Brian Wilson, Sophia Clark, and Kathy Hoyt. We're inviting organizational co-sponsors for future webinars. If you're interested, please write a note in the Q&A and we'll follow up with you. The format for today's webinar is as follows. Nan McCurdy will cover some of the important news items related to Nicaragua since our last webinar. She will have about 9 minutes. Then each of the other 2 speakers will have 15 minutes for their presentations, although I understand they'll be going back and forth in an interchange. After that, we should have at least 20 minutes for Q&A by the audience. A note to the audience, you can put your comments in the chat below, but please make sure that you put any questions intended for the panelists in the Q&A below. I'll be pulling those questions to address to the panelists. As I mentioned, I'm Barbara Larkham, and I coordinate the US-based portion of Casa, Baltimore, Limay, which is a Friendship City project linking Baltimore, Maryland with San Juan de Limay, Nicaragua. And now to introduce our first speaker. Nan McCurdy is the editor of the online weekly Nica Notes. She's a United Methodist missionary working in development in the countryside of Mexico. She lived in Nicaragua for over 30 years and recently spent 6 months there experiencing firsthand how the public health system handled the pandemic. Please welcome Nan McCurdy.
Thank you, Barbara. Hi, everyone. Thanks for being with us. I'm going to share the screen. So these are about 1/5 no, much less, 5% of the important news from the last month. The Alejandro Davila Bolaños Hospital in Managua once again received the highest accreditation in all areas and also received the award for excellence in safety quality from Accreditation Canada. The hospital is the only one in the region certified as an active member of the global network of green and healthy hospitals. The school snack will be doubled in areas affected by the November hurricanes. This will benefit children from 15 municipalities who will receive the snack at breakfast and lunch. The Zero Usury microloan program provided $1 million in loans to 3,000 women for their small businesses in January. According to Finance Minister Ivana Costa, in 2021, Nicaragua will return to economic growth with a budget $700 million more than in 2020. The National Plan to Fight Poverty includes fair redistribution of taxes. Resources will be directed to generate employment, attract investment, maintain stability, and increase exports. Finance Minister Acosta reported a record US $5 billion in exports in 2020. Technical education for rural youth is growing, with nearly 37,000 students studying 61 technical careers in 45 centers. This is the biggest and best technical education available in the region. Nicaragua received the Safe Travel Stamp. The Latin American Travel Association of the United Kingdom awarded Nicaragua the World Travel and Tourism Council's Safe Travel Stamp. Nicaragua received the award for its effective biosecurity measures and low COVID mortality rate. The mortality rate from cervical cancer decreased by 34% from 2007 to 2020. Nicaragua was recognized for reducing maternal and perinatal mortality by the regional interagency coordination movement Every Woman, Every Child, composed of organizations like UNAIDS, UN Women, Pan American Health Organization, UNICEF, and the World Bank. The number of maternity wait homes increased from 50 in 2007 to 178 in 2020. Maternal mortality has gone from 93 deaths per 100,000 live births in 2007 to 37 deaths in 2020. Neonatal mortality has also been cut by more than half. The government is building 24,000 social housing units, part of which will be finished this year. The Bismarck-Martinez program turned over 100 new houses to families on February 13th. Nicaragua excels at disaster risk management. According to the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, with relation to the recent hurricanes, Nicaragua showed that it has transitioned to a more proactive disaster risk management approach. Anna Wellenstein, Regional Director, Sustainable Development Practice Group, highlighted several things Nicaragua has done in a February 14th Relief Web article that reflects data from the World Bank. After Eta and Iota, the country assessed damages and losses within 3 weeks of the hurricanes, informing the timely mobilization of funds and early action towards a recovery plan. In 2020, the Finance Ministry prepared for the forecasted above average hurricane season by increasing its tropical cyclone insurance coverage. As a result, after the hurricanes, Nicaragua received $30.6 million in payouts. Nicaragua started evacuation procedures 3 days before the storms hit, reporting 6 times less fatalities than in Hurricane Felix in 2007. The country's response reflected their greater awareness of the vulnerability of certain areas and their ability to effectively use early warning systems and evacuation procedures to save lives. And that article is very much worth reading. The United Nations Economic Commission of Latin America and the Caribbean presented its special report, COVID-19 number 9. The report states that 55.7% of women in Nicaragua participate in the job market or carry out some form of paid work, placing it as the country with the highest participation of women in the workforce in the region. The 56th Women's Police Station was inaugurated in the municipality of Nandasmo to benefit more than 8,000 women. On February 18, the San Juan de Limay Road in the Department of Esteli was inaugurated, including 24 kilometers of pavement and a 41-meter-long bridge benefiting more than 16,000 people. And finally, 9 charter flights will bring tourists in March and April in response to high demand, because currently only Avianca and Copa are flying to Nicaragua. American, United, and Delta are flying to other countries in the region, but not to Nicaragua. Thank you so much.
Can't hear you, Barbara.
Sorry about that. Now to introduce our other 2 speakers. Erica Takeo is a North American based in Managua, Nicaragua. She's the coordinator of the Friends of the ATC, which is the solidarity network with the Rural Workers Association. She's also a part of the international staff team with the Continental Operating Secretariat of the Latin American Coordination of Rural Organizations, known as CLOC, C-L-O-C. CLOC is the expression of La Via Campesina in Latin America and the Caribbean. Our second speaker is Jill Clark Gallop. Jill has lived in the United States most of her life, but she has family roots in Nicaragua. While always generally in support of the Sandinista revolution, since 2018, she's been studying the situation in the country more closely in an effort to sort through the misinformation published in US corporate media. The past 2 years, she has attended 2 study delegations to Nicaragua, learning a lot and making new connections with social movements on the ground. She's an active member of Friends of Latin America, which is a solidarity organization in Maryland, and she is an assistant editor and translator at the Council on Hemispheric Affairs. Please welcome Erica Takeo and Jill Clark Gallop.
Thank you, Barbara. I'll be speaking first, and I'm going to start by sharing my screen. Okay, so if we're going to talk about food sovereignty in Nicaragua, we do need to understand what food sovereignty is. And it is a concept that was developed by La Via Campesina, which Barbara just mentioned. La Via Campesina is the worldwide peasant organization that brings together over 200 million peasant farmers, fisher folk, and pastoralists. After some preliminary meetings, including in Nicaragua, La Via Campesina was founded in Belgium in 1993. And this is part of small producers organizing to resist the spread of free trade agreements and neoliberalism, particularly with the founding of the World Trade Organization in 1996. La Via Campesina established the concept of food sovereignty in, actually the WTO was 1995. The food sovereignty was enshrined as a concept in 1996. So first, what food sovereignty is not. It is a rejection of the green revolution of the 20th century that brought agrochemicals and agribusiness to the developing world at the cost of native agriculture. And it also is against the concept of food security pursued through green revolution methods. So food sovereignty is the right to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and people's right to define their own food and agriculture systems. It prioritizes local agricultural production in order to feed the people, instead of monocrops for export, which is what happens increasingly to a country when free trade agreements come in. And what do peasants need to build food sovereignty? Land, water, seeds, and credit. And Erica's going to tell you more about how they got that in Nicaragua. It's interesting to know that peasants and small farmers produce 70 to 75% of the world's food on less than 25% of the world's farmland. Whereas agribusiness only actually provides about 30% of the food the world's population needs, because much of what they produce is lost to waste with long transportation and supply chains. And because the highly processed food does not nourish, but rather makes us sick with things like diabetes, obesity, heart disease, and cancer, because it's highly processed and often junk food. Agribusiness also uses 75 to 80% of the world's agricultural land, 80% of the water, and 90% of the fossil fuels and carbon emissions, which makes worldwide agriculture responsible for over a third of the world's carbon pollution. And it is in the hands of a small number of monopolies that dominate the global food chain and limit biodiversity. And it does kill biodiversity with, you see, 4 companies control 75% of the world market for seeds and agrochemicals. 3 companies control poultry genetics. Half of pork genetics are in the hands of 3 countries. 4 companies control most of the livestock. 7 companies control almost 100% of the global grain market. And Cargill, the world's dominant grain producer, has now gotten into producing poultry, pork, and beef because so much of the grain that they produce is fodder for these animals. So they've cut out the middleman and enlarged their monopoly this way. Now, if that didn't scare you enough, the big tech companies are in on the act as well. Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and Microsoft have been partnering with agro industry to automate and digitalize agriculture, to create farmerless agriculture, such as the Internet of Cows. This cow has these chips that tell when it needs to be milked, and there are drones and robots involved in all this process. And so anyways, food sovereignty feeds the people. It keeps the land clean so that it can produce for future generation. It captures carbon and cools the planet, and is the kind of small scale local solution that works in developing countries, and I think in developed ones as well. So there are some resources. Erica and I were co-authors on a paper published by the Council on Hemispheric Affairs. And we did this along with Avery Raimondo, who I want to give a shout out to, who's behind the scenes doing tech on this event. But you can read a lot of information there at the coha.org, Feeding the People in Times of Pandemic, the Food Sovereignty Approach in Nicaragua. And another fabulous resource, I'm sorry if Erica, if you were going to say this, it's okay to say it again. The Ben Linder Solidarity School, which Friends of the ATC organized under Erica's able leadership, is wonderful, and it's soon going to be available to people online. And you will find a lot of the information I shared in the agribusiness versus food sovereignty class taught by Sylvia Ribeiro. So over to you, Erica.
Great, thank you so much, Jill. That was an excellent introduction. I'm going to go share my screen now. So Jill gave a great introduction to food sovereignty, what it is, what it isn't. And I just wanted to add on that La Via Campesina, Jill mentioned that a little bit about the founding of La Via Campesina and this concept of food sovereignty. And La Via Campesina is now celebrating its, this year, the 25th anniversary of the birth of this concept of food sovereignty, which has gone on to move not just social movements and popular organizations, but governments and international decision-making bodies, perhaps most famously with the passing of the UN Declaration on Peasant Rights in December of 2018. Here in Nicaragua next year, we're going to be having a huge celebration to celebrate the 30th anniversary of La Via Campesina's founding as a social movement, perhaps the largest social movement in the world. And in 2023, we'll be holding its 8th international conference here in Nicaragua. So for La Via Campesina and for food sovereignty, Nicaragua has always played a very important role, a very historic role. So to transition to talking specifically about Nicaragua, hopefully you're seeing fine on your screen a bunch of photos of different examples of food production here in Nicaragua, because Nicaragua is really an example that we can learn a lot from in terms of the construction of food sovereignty. About 90% of the food consumed here in Nicaragua is produced within the country, and about 80% of that is by small-scale peasant agriculture, not by agribusiness. This includes the staple foods of beans and corn, but we also have fruits, vegetables, honey, coffee, dairy products, meat. You can see a lot of different examples in these photos. And Nicaragua also produces surplus food that it exports to nearby Central American countries and also to the United States. But of course, this process of constructing food sovereignty is not something that happened overnight, but it's a part of a very long history of struggle that's connected to anti-imperialism and the construction of national sovereignty here in Nicaragua. So this goes back to, for example, the time of Sandino, who imagined an economy that was based on peasant and indigenous communities organizing into agricultural cooperatives to grow food for local communities with their own land. He actually founded Nicaragua's first cooperative in the early 1930s in Huili in the northern department of Jinotega. Sandino's legacy was then taken up by the popular sectors of Nicaragua as they organized to overthrow the US Baptist Somoza dictatorship. And with the triumph of the Sandinista Popular Revolution in 1979, a massive agrarian reform program was implemented. Jill mentioned the importance of land in constructing food sovereignty. And this agrarian reform in the 1980s redistributed about half of the country's arable land, or about 5 million acres, into the hands of 120,000 formerly landless peasant families to grow food. The ATC, or Rural Workers Association, which is the organization that I work within, played a central role in this process. Then there was a neoliberal period, 3 neoliberal governments that weren't that interested in focusing on food sovereignty, but at the same time, Sandinismo and popular organization organized to defend the gains of the revolution, including the agrarian reform. You can see a few pictures here of the ATC participating in some massive marches in Managua during the neoliberal time. And then in 2007, the Sandinista government comes back into power, and there's an introduction of a wide range of social programs that support the construction of food sovereignty that really complement what popular organizations had been doing at the grassroots level. So I'm going to try and share here a summary of some of these different projects and processes that are happening these days that support the construction of food sovereignty here in Nicaragua. First, the continuing of the agrarian reform. Land titles have continued to be issued to small farmers, hundreds and thousands of land title to small farmers, and over half of these titles have been given to women. Also, over 300 indigenous and Afro-descendant communities, mostly on the Caribbean coast, have received communal land title, representing about 1/3 of the country's national territory. Second, I can't do this presentation without emphasizing the dozens of government social programs that have been created to help support small farmers, peasants, providing materials, technical assistance, capital, seeds, etc., under the National System of Production, Consumption, and Commerce. I'm going to quickly show 2 slides after this that go into a little bit more detail. And Jill's also going to talk about one concrete example of the Bono Productivo. There's also have to underscore the role that popular organizations continue to play in the countryside. So we have the ETC, we have organizations that are part of La Via Campesina, cooperatives, all working within their own local communities on different projects that are supporting food sovereignty. And then both, point 4 here that you can see on your slide, both the Nicaraguan government and popular organizations understand that agroecology needs to be implemented now as a model of food production that is kind of the base or one of the pillars of constructing food sovereignty. We understand agroecology to be a system of agriculture that's different than the model of the Green Revolution that Jill mentioned, that is focused on agrochemicals, growing in monoculture, growing at large scales, but a model that's based on peasant agriculture, traditional knowledge, having land to grow food for local communities with local seeds. And so a big part of this agroecology work is working with genetic material, including seeds, that's adapted for climate change. Nicaragua is one of the countries that's most impacted by climate change. So the importance of having seeds that are appropriate both for times of drought, also for hurricanes and other events that will come with climate change is so key. Then going back to last month's webinar topic on the popular economy, Nicaragua's popular economy, whether that be farmers markets, neighborhood stores, street vendors, the agricultural cooperatives, play a key role in food sovereignty because it's the space in which peasant food that's grown locally is distributed locally, stays in the hands of the community, and it also allows money to circulate locally rather than being sucked up by large transnational corporations. Then 2 more points. There are also a series of laws that have been passed since 2007 that protect and support small farmers, as well as the construction of strong and healthy local and national food systems. So just to mention 2 really quickly, we have Law 693 on food and nutritional security and sovereignty passed in 2009, and the National Law on Agroecology 765 that was passed in 2011. All of these points are underscored by very holistic training programs that are promoted both by popular organizations and by the government. So now I'm going to quickly share 2 slides. You probably won't get to see them long enough right now to be able to read everything that's on there, but we'll email you a copy of this presentation afterwards. These slides, I didn't make them. They're copies of slides from a recent presentation given by the government, but I also provide a translation here in English on the right-hand side of your screen that are basically a summary, including with specific numbers of all of the different government programs that are being put in place in 2021 that make a contribution towards peasant agriculture and its local distribution that are really the basis for a lot of the work to build food sovereignty here. So some examples of how the government are supporting small farmers with seeds, other production materials, technical assistance, training, farmers market, work to support people in created value-added products. One thing I wanted to highlight is that the primary beneficiaries of these programs are women, because they're really the backbone of the food system, not just in Nicaragua, around the world. So we're going to, I'll stop sharing my screen now. We're going to transition now into sharing a couple of concrete examples. So I'll pass it back to Jill, who's going to talk about the Bono Productivo and the Fundación Entre Mujeres.
Thanks, Erica. So as Erica briefly touched on it, the Bono Productivo Alimentario, also known as part of the Zero Hunger program, is a program whereby the government provides small women heads of household with animals, pregnant farm animals, and other seeds and supplies to boost their family economy. And this is a simple program that is having a huge impact on life in Nicaragua. And I'm going to share you a little 1-minute video of a woman from Channel 13 named Evita Mairena, showing you her her experience with this. Whoops. Yes, okay, share screen. And now I can't find, there we go, okay.
Además de generarle estabilidad económica, esta actividad le permite ayudar a sus familiares y vecinos, a quienes le vende ya sea un chanchito, peligüey o gallina a precio solidario.
Nosotros, por lo menos, un día yo mando a mi casa para mis nietos un galón o medio galón de leche. Está mi papá, que es un anciano, entonces también va su litro para él. Al día siguiente para mi otra hermana, que es otra mujer ya mayor y tiene sus nietos, entonces lo mismo. Ya la del día después, yo la vendo, yo vendo peligüey, vendo cabro, Si vienen a comprar gallinas, van gallinas guineas. Ahorita ahí tengo una nacencia de gallinas guineas, siempre hay entrada, porque hay quien venga a comprar los huevos de pato, los huevos de la gallina, el litro de leche.
Además de que
So I just add in that if you do have a chance to read our article on the COHA website, you'll see a nice quote from Edgardo Garcia, who's the General Secretary of the ATC, about this program and how it's the essence of Sandinismo. It's not giving people handouts, but rather viewing people who are not poor for any reason, but that they have been impoverished. And it views them as economic subjects and gives them the power to improve their own family economy. And I am now going to show you another screen with some images of the Among Women Foundation. And let's go. Show this slideshow. Oops. Sorry. So the first thing that impressed me about this organization of a few thousand women in the mountains of northern Nicaragua was this slogan: sovereignty over our bodies, our rights, and our seeds. And in fact, this is an organization that supports women in many aspects of their life, but agriculture and agroecology is an important part of it. And their seeds are an important part of their culture. This is a photograph from the first time I went on a delegation a couple of years ago. And actually Avery, who's doing tech for us, took this photograph. But this is, you can see the mountains going towards Honduras there behind us. I'm right there. And these are other people who are from our delegation. The rest are women of the FEM. And this is near the area where they have their seed experimentation area. And so what they're doing is preserving native seeds by studying what works best for them. They explained to us that they have from some 16 varieties of beans. They selected the ones that were most marketable and then did like a patchwork of 1 meter square experimentation areas of different kinds of beans. And every day they take data on how it's growing. And ultimately after their 60-day growing cycles and after 7 growing cycles, they selected the beans that do the best in their growing conditions and can survive drought and other weather problems. This is a sign on the door of their seed reservoir. They do not use the term seed bank. They find that too commercial and capitalistic. But you can see here, it's for the organizations that produce native seeds and are building food sovereignty, and they get support from the government technical support or agency, and it looks like even from the European Union and the government and the ATC, and this is the Among Women Foundation. And this is the inside of a seed reservoir. And this is Gladys, who lived next door to the house I was staying in. She was the daughter of Julia, who I stayed with on 2 visits to this small community of El Colorado. And she told me she's a local, she supports community education and she has the little bench there. This is like her little classroom. But she also has traveled to Honduras to give talks about the FEM seed program. And she said, you wouldn't believe how the people in Honduras are just so amazed with our seed preservation program because they are not allowed to use their own seeds. And some of you may know that this is because of USAID's policy of making aid to Honduras, and they do this in other countries as well, that they have to buy Monsanto Bayer agricultural inputs and seeds. So farmers there are not allowed to use their own seeds, which certainly must hinder Honduras's efforts to have food sovereignty. And in fact, Honduras and El Salvador did not make progress on the Millennium Development Goals to reduce hunger, and Guatemala has slipped backwards in terms of eliminating hunger since the CAFTA-DR free trade agreement was signed. So then here's coffee. Coffee is another main crop that the women of the FEM produce. They produce almost all of the food that they consume. They don't produce rice in this area, but they produce corn and beans, and they do produce a significant amount of coffee that they export. And so here picking coffee, and this is sorting the green from the red coffee berries. And here we are, there's even a little bit of Avery there, where this hand cranked machine takes the pulp off of the berries, and then they have to be dried. And this is a very low tech but effective device for drying the coffee berries. So I know I've seen on larger coffee plantations, the coffee spread out on the ground in large areas, but here they have this bed that must be, I don't know, about 8 or 10 feet by about 20 or 25 feet. And it has this roof that covers half of it that's on wheels. And so when it's not raining, they have the roof off of where the coffee is. And then when it rains, they can cover it. So that's a low-tech effective way to dry your coffee. And there she's showing you tomatoes from her garden. They have bio-intensive beds that they're very proud of and make their own compost. And these are just people farming the various vegetables that they produce. And here she's got her turkeys, and I see some guinea hens. And I don't know for sure if she's a beneficiary of the production bonus. She's in the town of Rosario that I did not stay in, but everybody has their farm animals. And actually, I should go say almost everybody has a cow. And there's a high rate of consumption of dairy products, which is somewhat of a luxury in many developing countries. And so the FEM is also proud of their honey production, which was explained to us that women weren't involved in this. It was considered too dangerous for women, but the FEM women are very proud to do this. And this is one of the products that they sell at the markets. And so these are jars of honey. And then there are 3 items that they market made with hibiscus flower. They have a jelly, wine, and tea that they do with the hibiscus flower. So, and this, if you want to read this quickly, I've shown this before, but it's, I just love, you can see to the left, the market or the agribusiness or traditional model of producing food. But the FEM's model based on food sovereignty is life-sustaining, and it's a whole way of life approach. So thank you for listening.
All right, thanks, Jill. It was really nice to see those photos of the FEM. I'm going to share just a couple examples quickly here of one experience from the ATC and one in our agroecology training that's pushed forward by Via Campesina. So I guess I got to go back to my slides. I guess real quick, I should say, because I'm not sure if everyone who's listening is familiar with the ATC. It's an organization that was founded in the 1970s during the insurrection to overthrow the Somoza dictatorship. And I think I had mentioned that it was really involved in organizing the agrarian reform, and today represents about 50,000 Nicaraguan peasants organized both into farm worker unions and small farmer cooperatives of small farmers, many of whom received their land during the agrarian reform. And I wanted to share a few pictures here from the Gloria Quintini Women's Cooperative. It's a women's cooperative of the ATC located near Managua in the community of Santa Julia. It's also a community that Jill was able to visit on the delegation that she spent with friends of the ATC. I think what's really powerful about this cooperative is it shows the gains that have been made thanks to the Sandinista revolution and thanks to popular organizations, and how key it is to organize to be able to construct food sovereignty. So these women during the Somoza era lived and worked on coffee farms, giant coffee farms, basically living in slave-like conditions in camps. They went from those kinds of conditions to, with the triumph of the revolution, organizing with the ATC to get land, learn how to read and write, learn how to organize. And also with the help of the ATC and the current Sandinista government, have been able to study and learn a lot about agroecology. They've implemented really diversified systems of production, very similarly to the experience of the Among Women Foundation that Jill has been talking about. So their main crop is coffee, which they actually roast and package and sell locally. But they also grow corn, beans, medicinal plants, tropical fruits, vegetables. They process some of their fruits into jams and jellies and also sell those locally. So all of the consumption is for themselves and their community. And then they also sell at local farmers markets organized through the Ministry of the Familiar and Cooperative Economy. And through the Friends of the ATC Solidarity Network in 2019, we began a Testimonies Project to collect stories of these women in these different cooperatives. And so I just wanted to read one quote here of a woman named Lola Kivel. She's one of the founders of this cooperative and really a leader in the community. She says, "The main achievement of the revolution is property. It's important that everyone has their piece of land. The second point is the struggle for water. The third is organization. If we are not organized, we would not be able to achieve all that we have here. The fourth point is education, because a country without knowledge is not prepared to struggle. Even though I didn't go to school and neither did Eloisa, we are happy that Leia, Gloria, and all the young people are studying because the community continues developing. The other point is food production, because we cannot live without food. Today, the land is diversified. There's no one who doesn't have avocados, bananas, or yucca. The change is gigantic. 20 years ago, we had to borrow rice because there's no food. Now we have food in the community. It is very important because there's education and there's food. There are people who want to move forward." So we'll see if we can share a link with you all to read the whole publication of the testimonies, and I'll leave a copy of this video here, which I'm not going to show right now because we don't have enough time, but it shows some of the bean harvests in this community. And then the other example I wanted to talk about is the IALA Ichimuleo. IALA stands for, in Spanish, Latin American Institute of Agroecology, which is a strategy of La Via Campesina International, so the international social movement, to train young people that are cadre from the different member organizations, the different peasant organizations in agroecology. And we have one of those IALA campuses here in Nicaragua for students, not just from Nicaragua, but from throughout the Mesoamerican region, as well as from the Caribbean. So these schools are really focused on how to decolonize a lot of the ideas about growing food that became really strong in a lot of peasant communities with the Green Revolution, about how to grow food, and focus on different systems for growing food that are really about rescuing peasant knowledge and traditional models of food production that are in harmony with Mother Earth. So the students in IALA study technical components of agroecology, but just as importantly, they also, it's also a process of political and ideological training that helps put what they're learning, the technical piece, into context, and also helps to strengthen the social movement, which is so key throughout the continent of Latin America and the Caribbean. And the idea is that in the IALA, after the students graduate, they return to their home territories to put into place what they've learned with their families, with their communities, and also with their organizations, which is really, really important to ensure that this generation of young people stays in the countryside and continues to grow food, and that they do so in an agroecological way. I think it's also really important, Jill had mentioned a little bit about the differences between Nicaragua and the rest of the Central American region. I think it's really important that the IALA that exists in Nicaragua has students from other areas of Central America that have the opportunity to study here. So a couple pictures here, first of the first graduating cohort from November of 2019, and some photos from the current second cohort of students. There's almost 100 students in the second cohort of IALA that are not just from Nicaragua, but like I said, other parts of the region, Dominican Republic and Paraguay. And there's going to be a third cohort of just Nicaraguan students, about 30 of them starting classes next month. So I wanted to close out this example, I could talk all day about it, with a short clip from Migdalia Cruz. She's a woman from the ATC, the Nicaraguan organization here, that was a graduating member of the first cohort in IALA. So
Pues en la tarea que tenemos como jóvenes de recuperar todo lo que es la tierra, de recuperar nuestra identidad como jóvenes campesinos, está en nuestra familia, ¿no? Ahora que nosotros como campesinos estamos produciendo, sembrando maíz, frijoles, integrando animales a nuestros patios. Entonces aquí siempre estamos produciendo, porque si nosotros dejamos de producir la tierra no vamos a tener que comer, de esto vivimos. Entonces, normal, en paz, y seguimos trabajando en fe y unidad, porque así es que se puede lograr salir adelante. No podemos esperar otra cosa, sino que trabajar. Pues,
So between Jill and us, we're just going to quickly conclude. I just wanted to conclude by saying, first of all, thanks everyone for listening. Look forward to the Q&A. I hope there's been a lot of interest in the topic. One thing I wanted to highlight that maybe we just mentioned a little bit in other parts of the presentation is the quote that actually begins the Koha article that Jill and Avery and myself co-authored, that basically says a nation that doesn't grow what it eats is not free. And I think a lot of these webinars that have been being held every month hosted by Alliance for Global Justice with other organizations have been discussing the role that US imperialism plays today and has historically played in Nicaragua. And a lot of those have made attempts to strangle Nicaraguans' economy and also make it so that people become impoverished and go hungry, which means that different forms of intervention can be more successful. But because Nicaragua has been able to work on this process of constructing food sovereignty, it also makes it more sovereign as a nation. So with that, I'll conclude and pass it back to Jill to conclude.
I don't need to say anything after that. That's a perfect way to conclude. I think we can take questions now.
Thank you both for this wonderful presentation. It was very informative. We do have a number of questions that have arisen. First, I would like to bring up a couple of really quick things that I think you can answer just in 30 seconds or something. And then let's move to questions that are directly related to food sovereignty in Nicaragua. After that, if there's time left, then there are some other more political questions that are broader that we can address. Okay, so first of all, will this be posted on YouTube afterward? I want to send it to family and friends. I assume the answer is yes, correct? Erica?
Yeah, it's currently being recorded, and we'll work with AFGJ staff to get it up either on AFGJ's channel or Friends of the ATC channel, or both, definitely.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, and also, does the ATC work in Honduras? Was a question from Steve Molds.
Steve, yeah, so I guess we didn't talk too much about the structure of La Via Campesina, but La Via Campesina's membership is all mass grassroots-based organizations that are all either exist at a national level or at a regional level. So the ATC is an organization that's actually a founding member of La Via Campesina, but there are other member organizations that are in Honduras. So there we have the two most active organizations there are the Central Nacional de Trabajadores del Campo, the National Rural Workers Center, and then the, let's see, in English would be the Peasant and Indigenous Women's Council, CODINCA, that kind of coordinate the work of La Via Campesina in Honduras.
A question just arose that's related, so I'll ask it now. How many regions in Nicaragua does ATC work in?
So ATC works in the majority of the departments that aren't in the Caribbean Coast Autonomous Region, keeping in mind that the base of the ATC are farm workers or landed peasants, and the majority of the Caribbean Coast is indigenous communities and Afro-descendant communities.
Okay, so then there were a couple of, let's see. Okay, these two I think could be put together. One is genetic modification used in any of these programs? My understanding was that it is not, but if you could just say something about that for sure. And then do you have any information or resource material available on permaculture and how that's related to agroecology? I believe they're very intimately related, are they not?
Do you want me to start that, Jill, and maybe you can add on?
Wait, I thought that was a question for you. Could you repeat it quickly?
I can start if you want.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, thank you for that question. I could see why it could be a little confusing because we also use the word genetic material in a couple different ways. But no, GMO agriculture does not exist in Nicaragua. So genetically modified seeds, which is such a big strength of Nicaragua in comparison to most other places around the world, especially very industrialized nations. However, Jill gave a really an excellent example of how communities are coming together to work on genetic material, do breeding of seeds that are adapted and appropriate for climate change. That also includes rescuing native seeds that were perhaps in danger of being extinct. So there is genetic work being done here, but it's a totally different and popular kind of genetic work. And that's supported both by organizations like the ETC, like Foundation Against Women, as well as INTA, which is the Nicaraguan Institute for Agricultural Technology, which is doing really, really important work related to kind of the genetic material that's here in the country. And then the other question about permaculture. Yeah, so there are a lot of things connected between a lot of concept of agroecology and permaculture, with one caveat that oftentimes permaculture is often can often be reserved for people with money that can pay large prices to get a permacultural certificate. And they study it, they have to take a long course, take a class and receive a certificate. So that has been, I'm not a permaculture expert, but I know that's been one critique of permaculture, whereas the idea of agroecology is that it's a true people's agriculture, peasants agriculture that's based on local ways of growing food. And it's not something that can be bought or sold, but something that's exists everywhere for our ability to grow food in our communities. So, however, there are certain techniques and practices that are used in the permaculture school that are often very much used in the context of agroecology.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I've got to find George Pock. Oh, here it is. Okay, so these two questions I think could be put together also. If there is an international food crisis in the future or starting now or whatever, will the food sovereignty of Nicaragua be drained, or is the country achieving enough sovereignty that it's going to be okay? And also then, second question related, can you focus on the advancement of rural women in achieving their social and economic rights after the support that you provide along with other government programs?
You want to do the first half, Erica, and I'll talk about the women a little bit?
Sure, that'd be great. Yeah. So in terms of, well, I think a couple things about food. First of all, I really want to go back to what Jill shared at the start of the presentation about the reality that it's really small farmers that feed the planet. It's not agribusiness, even though agribusiness controls the majority of the world's food, to put it in a global context. And that's why to avoid an international food crisis, including in addition to addressing things like climate change, it's really, really key to support small scale peasant agroecology, especially small scale peasant agriculture, especially agroecology. And I think that Nicaragua is an example of a place that's doing that. I also think the Nicaraguan government is a leading world example at disaster prevention, mitigation, relief. We saw this with the example of hurricanes Eta and Iota that took place in November of last year, that took place within, they hit land within 2 weeks of one another, and they both reached land as a Category 4 hurricane. And while, of course, they created infrastructure damage and other kinds of damage, they did not have the same destructive and kind of long-term damage that we see in Honduras, Guatemala, et cetera, that are still trying to recover, that lost a lot of human life, et cetera. So just two quick examples of things that happen here in Nicaragua that help kind of ease the impact when these kinds of crises happening. In the context of the hurricane, I really wanted to share that immediately after the hurricane happened, there were a lot of farmers that had certain crops damaged, especially beans and corn that were in their kind of peak harvest time. So they got wet and basically rotted or sprouted for certain farmers in certain regions. So the government already had in plans right away a plan to distribute seeds. There were like, I don't know the exact number, but I want to say something like 60,000 packets that were distributed around the country to get farmers growing food right away to make up for maybe some of the crop damages that had taken place in that growing cycle. And then there's also a state, how do you say it in English? A state entity that basically holds on to certain key staple crops, beans, rice, corn, that prevent, if there's price fluctuations, prevent that the price fluctuation from being put as a burden onto consumers. So they help control price, but also if there were any kinds of shortages, they also help to introduce those into the market so that people, first of all, don't go hungry, but also so that food costs don't skyrocket.
And to just answer the part about women, it's important to know that Nicaragua has been recognized by a few different international sources as doing incredibly well for gender parity and for the position of women. And the World Economic Forum, actually, which isn't any kind of a pro-Sandinista outfit, ranks countries according to progress at closing gaps in economic participation, educational attainment, health and survival, and political empowerment. And they have placed Nicaragua 5th. That's the best in the Americas, and it's only positions 1 to 4 are the Nordic countries. So that's pretty impressive. So, you know, feeding yourselves and feeding your family and boosting a family's income with programs like the Bono Productivo does have a cascading effect. And Nan shared with you some statistics about reducing maternal mortality and all the improvements in the health system. You know, this enables people to work better, to have resources for other things, the education system. You know, people, we met farmers on our delegations who, in some cases, they weren't sure who was going to stay on the land because the son became a doctor and the daughter became a lawyer and this and that. So, you know, this whole cycle, this whole system is improving people's well-being.
And related to that, I think, is a question about migration. Is the food sovereignty that's occurring then helping Nicaragua, in contrast to some of the other Central American countries, to keep people at home because that's where they want to be instead of migrating either to the United States or to Costa Rica or somewhere?
You want me to?
I think Jill should answer because she's organizing an event on this topic.
Oh, yes. A week from tomorrow, International Women's Day. I hope that when you send out a recording of this event, you can send out an invitation to that as well. But Friends of Latin America that I work with is organizing an event about root causes of migration. And we're creating an original documentary that interviews women in 3 Central American countries. It's not the 3 Northern Triangle countries that constitute the that make up the people going in the caravans north. But we took 2 of those and Nicaragua in order to show how US policy really impacts migration. And so we interviewed women in Nicaragua talking about why they are not migrating. And a big thing was safety. There's much less crime in Nicaragua, not only compared to its very violent neighbors, but it has one of the lowest crime rates in all of the Americas. Inside crime, in fact, shows Nicaragua as the lowest. So it's doing well with crime. We mentioned how hunger is going down. Erica mentioned about the response to the hurricanes. We interviewed some women who are leaving Honduras because their country did nothing to protect them from the hurricanes and now to recover from the hurricanes. And people are hungry and they have very little and they're looking for a place to live and a job. And someone who had a minimum wage job that didn't give her enough to pay for her kids to go to school. And Nicaraguans know what that was like during 16, 17 years of neoliberal rule when public school no longer was public. So there are many reasons that Nicaraguans are not migrating like their neighbors are.
Jill, if you get a chance, perhaps you could put the link for registration to that webinar in the chat, or if you can't, that's okay. Well, it will be going out later. I just thought maybe you had it handy. Okay. How is the agricultural and farming community dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic?
You would know, Erica, not me.
Yeah, I can start. So, well, first of all, the context here of the COVID pandemic. Of course, Nicaragua has not been unimpacted by any means from the COVID pandemic, but the approach here has been a lot different than countries with neoliberal governments, and I think also shows the strength of the Sandinista government in going back to or protecting the needs of their people, including their health and their lives. So here, the first, in terms of the community health context, the government organized well in advance a whole plan of response to COVID that's based upon the country's national healthcare system. That's also based in a community healthcare model, very similar to how Cuba works. So there have been, ever since about February of last year, community health brigades that have been really involved in working door to door to educate people about COVID, about the symptoms, what to do if one feels sick. And also having in place from the start a contract tracing system at the national level was really key in preventing COVID from really having a big impact in comparison to other countries. So just to give a little context, the country, Nicaragua, has a little over 6 million people, maybe 6.5 million. And there's been a total of about 5,000 COVID cases, between 5,000 and 6,000. And so in comparison to other places, has with a very high recovery rate. So it shares a lot with other countries on the left that have been able to address the COVID crisis, and it's very soon going to be starting to vaccinate people. So I think one of the key bases for allowing the production of food and the distribution of food never stopped during the COVID-19 pandemic. This was a strategy of the Sandinista government to keep the economy moving forward, to never shut things down. This is also understanding that it's adapted to Nicaragua's reality and needs, that a lot of people need to work every day to be able to feed their families and eat. It's not, I think, that was one key thing that helped Nicaragua move forward to prevent a lot of the economic impact that we're seeing from COVID in a lot of places, prevent hunger, but also peasants have always been growing food through the pandemic. I regularly go out to the countryside and everything was basically normal. People were busy growing food and, asking how we were all doing and, taking the precautions and everything, but food production never stopped in Nicaragua, and the distribution of that never stopped either. The markets were always full. People were always going to shop at the markets. And so there were never any limits on peasant agriculture here in Nicaragua during that time. It continues, but during this time period.
And if I could just add something, in April, when everyone was having these massive lockdowns, including countries that took advantage of them to institute more authoritarian practices. And the opposition in Nicaragua was criticizing Nicaragua for not having a massive lockdown. I think that's another example of Nicaragua doing what is appropriate for their country. And you can see now with the low COVID death rate in Nicaragua. But at any rate, at this time, I spoke to Diana Martinez, the president of the FEM, and she said, "Oh, I know we're all concerned about this pandemic coming, but at least we'll have food." Mm. And what a different perspective. And when we look at it now, what an appropriate perspective. It's easy for people who live in comfortable houses in Managua, who have the means to manage this crisis or that crisis because they have money. It shows how disconnected they are from the people of their country when somebody would say, yeah, this is coming, we might have a recession, but we will have food. And I hope too many people don't die from the pandemic, but we will have food. And also La Via Campesina is talking about, we need to be able to get to our fields. And I know that Erica told me that on some calls, they talked about people in other countries where they had severe lockdowns. The food was rotting in the fields because they weren't allowed to get out to their fields. But that, I think I got the impression from what I was reading on La Via Campesinas, they were saying that they wanted everything that Nicaragua had without naming Nicaragua.
Yes, and I have to just add, that's kind of what we observed in San Juan de Limay as well, that people were pretty much operating normally for a long time, outside at least, not in stores and so forth. They weren't even wearing their masks because they didn't feel necessary. Now they're just starting to do that a little bit, that precaution. Okay, next question.
Excuse me, Barbara. I just want to add in so our viewers aren't confused. My family and friends in Managua, and I see masks all the time. So I don't know. San Juan de Limay, I think really didn't have any cases for a very long time, but I think there's a lot of mask use in the country.
Yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Yeah, this is a rural area we're talking about here where it had not arrived there to any great extent until recently, and even now, not very much at all, just a couple of cases. Okay, let's see. Okay, let's go to this one, Paul Oquist. Paul Oquist had a plan for reorganizing land use with the right crop for the right kind of land. I think that included taking some land out of cattle ranching. Do you have any further information on that idea, or is that going anywhere? No, okay. And can you speak at all to what kinds of programs are there in dry areas to protect water resources and make it available to farmers?
That's a great question. Maybe I'll start, Jill, if you want to add anything on, please do, because we might have seen some in Colorado and some other communities. It is really important to mention that there's basically what's called the dry corridor in Nicaragua, which is an area that's particularly impacted by climate change, basically by drought, well, as the name would imply, things getting drier, less rain. And maybe when it does rain, it comes more in downspouts rather than constantly. So both organizations, I think like the FEM, but also the ATC, other Via Campesina organizations, other organizations that work in the countryside, and the government have a lot of programs to support people in doing basically rainwater catchment and storage. That looks different from place to place, also depends on the number of resources, but there's some fairly innovative things going on. Also, within the it's also really important to mention that as farmers adopt and make transitions towards agroecological methods of food production, all types of soil and water conservation are taken into account that also help those production systems be more resilient when things are really dry. There is a dry season here and it can be very hard. And there also have been some droughts. I think someone was asking about droughts in the chat somewhere, but I remember when I first came to Nicaragua in 2015, there was a very severe drought that was really impacting farmers, but have also been seeing a lot of great examples of work being done to support farmers get through dry periods.
And I don't have much to add to that, but I know the government last year launched a program to help the farmers, specifically that Nica Vida program to help farmers in the dry corridor, and harvesting rainwater is a big part of it, but I think there's other supports to farmers.
Okay. Let's see, let's take a couple of questions that are more general, having to do with US-Nicaragua relations. Let's see, one question is, the US is dominating the narrative right now against Nicaragua in ways like saying it's a socialist country, or that kind of thing, communism is bad. And is that similar to what they're doing with China, I think is the question. Are there any similarities there?
I think we should stay on topic. I don't present myself as a China expert, but definitely there's red baiting out there in the United States.
Yeah, I probably phrased that badly too. I didn't read the question as originally written, but what about the trade deals supported by the US? No, never. I'm not sure that's a good question. Sorry.
There was a question that I'd like to answer quickly from
Yeah.
Helen from the UK. Could I?
Okay. Yes.
Hi, Helen. I saw you asked about whether or not IALA was also doing stuff online, class online. I didn't mention that in my presentation, that in the context of the pandemic, of course, it was hard for international students to come here, and it's still been difficult. So the agroecology school opened up an online campus, which is, I feel like, pretty innovative for social movement organizations to create their own online campus. And that's been growing really well as having a hybrid learning model. But all of the in-person coursework for Nicaragua is going on currently right now in person. And hopefully the Central American students that are part of the cohort will be arriving within the next couple of weeks here into the country.
Can one of you or both of you discuss the NICA Act, the purported justification for it, and does it affect the average Nicaraguan?
Do you want me to start? Do you want to start, Jill?
You go ahead, Erica.
Okay, I'll start. You can maybe help fill me in. So the NICA Act, which was passed in the end of 2018, stands for the Nicaragua Investment and Conditionality Act. It's an act that basically prevents Nicaragua's access to certain types of international loans from international lending institutions, for example, the World Bank. These kinds of loans are really, really important for Nicaragua's development as a country. It's a small country and has always been known by the World Bank, the World Economic Forum, et cetera, as being very, very good at administering these loans and paying them back on time. It has a very good credit record. So there wouldn't be another reason for them to have these types of loans denied. The basis upon which the US government passed the NICA Act was saying that the Nicaragua has to return to having free and fair elections and become a more democratic country, which to me I find quite offensive coming from the US government. I could use stronger language there, but probably not best to do that in a webinar. The actual reality on the ground is that Jill can also share her opinion here, that There has, especially after the start of the NICA Act, there were certain difficulties with certain kinds of access to international loans. However, I feel like a little bit of that has been lifted up. There's been some important loans that have been passed recently to access COVID-19 pandemic support, economic recovery after hurricanes, et cetera, a couple of key international loans. And another thing about the NICA Act is that one thing that's written into it, it's a little bit ambiguous, but it excludes certain kinds of kind of like social program loans. So certain loans, certain programs can be able to move forward. The Nicaragua government knew that the NICA Act was coming, so they had a lot of their loans set up ahead of time, at least through 2021. And I also think, going back to the topic of this webinar, having these other, these kinds of programs that are in place to build food sovereignty and to make the country sovereign, have also helped Nicaragua in general resist these kinds of sanctions measures. Jill, I don't know if you want to add anything else on.
I would just add that what Erica said about Nicaragua's good performance on repaying loans and its good credit. It's not only that, Nicaragua is also recognized by the IDB and I think the World Bank, and I know certainly the Central American Bank for Economic Integration and others, I believe, for excellent execution of loans. They've carried them out. They've done it, used the money for what it was supposed to be used for, and they've had successful programs. I had heard that nothing was coming through from the World Bank, but after the hurricanes and because of COVID, I think some money has gotten through. It sounds like something that can be kind of manipulated, and the language is subjective, as Erica said. But I did notice when I was there, I heard, for example, like, well, I know that it'd been more difficult, more cumbersome for donations to come in to charitable organizations from outside because of the banking issues. And also one example I heard was that there is like bus fare is subsidized, but also everybody uses little cards to pay for the bus, but they couldn't do that anymore. They had to take away that card system because part of the technology came from the US. You know, it's different companies that contribute to the technology for that. And although I don't think Nicaragua is certainly not suffering to the degree that Cuba or Venezuela are suffering from sanctions, but this is how it starts. And it's important, and I understand that this is why the Sanctions Kill Coalition wanted to organize a delegation to Nicaragua now to look at a country that's doing a great job defending itself and maybe is going to withstand sanctions better because of the food sovereignty and because of the energy efficiency. There's been so much done with renewable energy. I don't mean energy efficiency, I mean energy self-sufficiency, and so much has been done. Nicaragua has great geothermal, solar and wind potential. But this is how it starts. And we don't want Nicaragua to get to the degree that Venezuela got. We don't want Nicaragua to get to where Iran and Cuba have gotten. We have to say no to these sanctions.
Well, I see that our time is up, but I want to thank everyone for attending. We had very good attendance today, and I know more people have signed up, so they're probably going to check out the recording later on. I've tried to make a copy of all of the chats and all of the questions, so anything that wasn't addressed here, perhaps we can try to address later. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and thank you to our speakers. Okay, bye.
Thank you for organizing it. Thanks, everyone, for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Bye. Take care.